Purnamadah Purnamidam Purnat Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnamadaya Purnamevavashishyate. Om Shantihi Shantihi Shantihi. Suddenly two Siddharthas in the room. Upanishad. First verse we started studying it in our previous session. This verse, not asked by any specific person to any specific person, it just records the kinds of questions that the individuals gathered in the group were asking each other. That's the format of this Upanishad. The 5 questions, we can quickly once again read the translation of the first verse. The Sanskrit mantra, I will just quickly recite it once again. Om Brahma-vādino vadanti kiṁ kāraṇaṁ brahma kutasma jātā jīvāma kena kvacha saṁpratiṣṭhāḥ Adhiṣṭhitāḥ kena sukhetareṣu vartāmahe brahmavido vyavasthāṁ. Om, those who discourse on Brahman, pure consciousness, or the sacred teachings, say, what is Brahman, the cause? From where are we born? By what do we live? And into what do we merge? O you all who know Brahman, presided over, by whom do we live in pleasure and in the other, i.e. in suffering, each in our respective situations? 5 questions have been asked. The first question is about, just to remind you again, is about the cause. Kāraṇaṁ means cause. Then the second one is about the origin. There is not much difference between cause and origin, but while by cause, by kāraṇa, what is meant is a universal cause, by the second word, origin, what is meant is the origin of this body and the internal as well as the external senses. So the very origin of this body. And then the third question fundamentally is about what is this body? From where does it originate? By what is it sustained? And into what does it get absorbed? What is the absorber? Into what does it get absorbed? And then the last question is about the presider. By what is it presided? by what is it ruled, if we may use the word, the ruler, the presider. So the 5 questions are about these 5 principles, and we are going to discuss each one of them and the implications based on the answers. The cause has been referred to by the word Brahman. Brahman simply means, as I explained it in my previous class, it is derived from the root brih, which means to expand. And it is the superlative. It can be treated as the superlative of expansion, which means the most expanded one. The biggest, the greatest, the mightiest, within which everything exists. And then I also explained that grammatically the word for emptiness, Śūnya, used by the Buddha, has grammatically precisely the same meaning. And it's not only it's not only grammatically that there are tremendous similarities, even the way the Advaita Vedanta masters explain Brahman and the way the Buddhist masters, such as Nagarjuna, explain Śūnya, emptiness, there is tremendous similarity, which has been noticed by masters on both sides. Shankaracharya often mentions that if you would just change this much when he has his dialogues with the Buddhists, if you would just, for example, change the idea that consciousness, too like everything else, is permanent to the Yogachara, to the Chitta Matras, when he has these dialogues. And they speak of this underlying substantial consciousness known as Alaya Vijnana, the storehouse consciousness in Mahayana. He often says that if you would just give up the idea that this too is permanent, then we are speaking about the same thing. So often such similarities, even in their debates, in their dialogues, have been noticed. Some of the later Mahayana masters have referred to Advaita Vedanta as the least pernicious, dangerous teaching because it is so close to the teachings of Mahayana. So amongst all the pernicious, dangerous teachings, this is the least pernicious, the least dangerous. Similarly, when it comes to words like Śūnya and Brahman, these two words, Brahman and Śūnya, which is the word for emptiness, they are widely used because they are widely, for example, the word Śūnya for emptiness is widely used also in the Upanishads in the context of Brahman. Empty of everything else. Empty of what? Empty of differences in space. Empty of differences in time. Empty of differences that is there between two things. This is different from this and this is different from that. So that which is omnipresent, present everywhere. Empty of all the different 3 types of limitations. But that which fills up everything like empty space. This is the language. This is the language that we see in several of the Upanishads. In fact, there is a text known as Uttara Gita, the later Gita, a very interesting text, which is a dialogue between Krishna and Arjuna after the war was over. The famous Gita is a dialogue before, and that is a dialogue afterwards. And there when he describes the true nature of the self, urdhva shunyam, empty above, adha shunyam, empty below, madhya shunyam, empty in between, sarva shunyam, empty everywhere, sa ātmeti samadhisthasya lakshanam. For someone who is in the deepest states of samadhi, for him this is the definition of ātman, the true nature of the self. So where lies then the differences? And as within the last 2-3 years, my interest in Buddhism has risen tremendously, and often what we find is that when you actually go into the teachings and analyze them, you see that many differences that the later masters have spoken of are simply interpretations of sections which could have been also understood differently. So for example, I think it's quite a common expression for the Buddha in his Pali texts when he speaks of this state of beatitude, supreme bliss, what he says, that such a person moves around in this world with a self that has become Brahman. Now those who have studied even a little bit of Buddhism, for them the language in itself will sound totally against the teaching of selflessness, but this is sometimes the kinds of language, and specifically, of course, it can be said that the sections which I have used, which I have seen him using these words, are sections in which he's having dialogues with great scholars of the Vedas. So he's sort of taking a little bit their language and presenting his own ideas. That's his skill. That's his the way, because he often, instead of imposing his own ideas on someone else, he very often starts to speak in the language of his listeners so that they can understand him and relate with him. But my point was that he's not that antithetical the way we sometimes see modern scholars. In any case, I'm very well aware of the differences, but why I keep on pointing out these similarities, because differences, when we focus too much on the differences, they breed dissent. And when we focus on the similarities, then we are united, then it becomes possible for us to have dialogue, because then we find some common grounds, and it is with the help of that common ground that different spiritual traditions then can have a meaningful dialogue with each other. The time of debates, the time of negating others is over. I think today is a time when we have to look at the similarities of all the different teachings, and with the help of this, reach the very quintessence of all those teachings. In any case, in Advaita Vedanta, even this term, which is a central term for Advaita Vedanta, when it comes to the highest teachings of Advaita Vedanta, then the masters of Vedanta and Yoga, who had united Vedanta and Yoga together, such as this beautiful collection of teachings known as Yoga Vasishtha, the favorite text of sages living in Rishikesh and beyond Rishikesh. When my father came for the first time to Rishikesh as a young man in his late teens or early 20s, he met a great sage here, just in Sheshdhara, which is 1 kilometer further up along the Ganga. His ashram is still there. And he had taken total kshetra sannyasa. Kshetra sannyasa means renunciation of the area. Renunciation of area means that you remain completely in one room and you go nowhere. You renounce going out anywhere. So he lived in this one room. He never left his room except to go to take his bath to the Ganga. He never went anywhere. And for the rest of the day, his son, who was also already quite old and who used to live in Punjab Sindh Kshetra, he used to bring his food at the noontime from there, and then he used to read for the rest of the afternoon. He used to read this text known as Yoga Vasishtha. Even in Shivananda Ashram, great masters such as Swami Venkateshananda, who is well known in the West for spreading the yogic teachings, has ashrams in different places of the world, including the one that I know about in Perth, in Australia. He too, and he has written a beautiful commentary also on the Yoga Sutras. His favorite text too was this. And I can tell you that why it is the favorite text of such great masters, because what happens in this text is that often the master really breaks through and completely destroys any established notions or concepts that might arise and someone might become attached to as a result of these philosophical dialogues. So, for example, there is a beautiful discussion there that what is Purusha, the indwelling consciousness for Yoga and Sankhya? They call it Purusha. If you look at the Yoga Sutras, at the Sankhya philosophical teachings of Kapila, it's all about Purusha. The word that is used there is Purusha. Then he says, those who study the quintessential teachings of the Vedas, which means the Upanishads, they all speak about Brahman, this omnipresent consciousness. The Buddhists, the Vijnanavadis, the Yogacharas, the practitioners of yoga in the Mahayana Buddhist tradition, they refer to it as Vijnanamatra, consciousness alone, Chittamatra, consciousness alone. Those who speak of emptiness, this is Yoga Vasishtha, I'm just quoting verbally from Yoga Vasishtha. Those who speak of emptiness, they use the word Śūnya for it. Ultimately, what is it? It is the light within which even enlightens the sun, and everything else illuminates even the sun. And then he continues to say, he continues by saying that all these names, and he lists many other names from different traditions, all these names, they just are imagined names, in the sense that to convey an ineffable experience, an experience which is very difficult to express, and every experience is very difficult to express in words. When I eat sugar, I say, it is sweet. But what will that word mean to you if you have never experienced sweetness yourself? Then that word does not convey anything. It's only when the other person too has experienced sweetness that then we can have this mutual consensus that, okay, whatever we experience when we taste this, we refer to it as sweet. That's all. And then we both start understanding each other. Then we can start having a dialogue with each other. But this is just because we both understand English language. If we would be talking in Hindi, we would be using a very different word. Meetha would be speaking Sanskrit. It would be mishta, different words. And what if the other person has never tasted sweetness in their lives? Then they would not understand any one of these words. This is the problem with these words. So we have to remember that these names, they are imagined names, and they never ultimately are capable, he says, nasvabhavajaha. They are never ultimately capable of referring to the true nature of reality as it is in its totality. They are words, they have their limitations. That is what the Yoga Vasishtha says. It constantly reminds its listeners to break these limitations of the mind, which sometimes arise on the path of spirituality when we choose a particular path. And we have to choose a particular path. We have to follow. It's as simple as if I want to reach Rishikesh, there are so many different paths that lead to Rishikesh. You can go from the north, you can go from the south, you can go from the east, you can come from the west. But if somebody calls me and asks me, well, I want to reach Rishikesh, in which direction should I walk? Then I would say, first tell me where you are. And accordingly, that person has to take that particular path. But once they reach Rishikesh, and even on the way to Rishikesh, if they develop this narrow-mindedness that this path, the path that I'm following, is the only correct path, they are creating limitations. And that is when people with the same goal, walking towards the same city, start unnecessarily fighting with each other, simply because they are just walking from different directions towards the same city. So by transcending sometimes also, going beyond these concepts are, and these words, they are extremely useful because they help us speak about particular experiences. Words, they are symbols, and symbols help us speak about things in the world out there. So they are helpful, but we should not get lost in them. So the question that is being asked here is, what is this cause which is often referred to in the Upanishadic and Vedic teachings as Brahman, the mightiest, the greatest, the biggest, the most expanded one? The Sanskrit can also be translated a little bit differently. Here it has been translated as, what is Brahman, the cause, as you can see in the translation. It can also be translated differently. Is Brahman the cause? It can also be translated like this. Is Brahman really the cause? The intention that is buried deep within such an interpretation of this question is that how can Brahman, which is omnipresent, which is present everywhere, really be the cause? There needs to be some movement. From where does movement come? From where does movement come? Because for something to arise, there needs to be movement. And in this principle, which is so densely present everywhere, and in which there is no movement at all, how can that be the cause of something? That is the implicit idea, for which then later on the master, and this interpretation, the commentators, they reach this interpretation of this question based on what comes later. Because what comes later is that the master speaks of the energy, the first movement, which is referred to as māyā. Prakrti means nature, shakti, that power, that potential, that energy which creates this manifested, visible, tangible reality. So, and this is the first Upanishad, in fact. Because I keep on referring to as this, traditionally it's the 11th Upanishad. In the first 10 Upanishads, can you believe the word māyā only comes once? And these are huge collections of teachings. And māyā is one of the central idea of Advaita Vedanta. And yet, it is just once, simply once, that this pure consciousness becomes, it's one, but it becomes many with the help of māyā. Just once. And it's an extremely ancient sentence, which simply has been quoted earlier. The word shakti never occurs. The word prakṛti, nature, shakti, energy, never occurs in any one of the 10 previous Upanishads. And the reason for those masters is simple. They want to experience the consciousness as it is in its pure nature, without being influenced by the external changing situations and circumstances. And the second thing which is important for them is to realize the oneness of this consciousness within with the consciousness that is out of this body, present within all beings. That's all what the 10 Upanishads are about. For them, everything else, stories of creation, creator, how creation takes place, all these stories, they are insignificant for those masters. And that's why nature, energy, all these, they are not part of the discussion in those Upanishads. But here, in the 11th Upanishad, this idea, because then when the curiosity came further, well, we have now heard the 10 Upanishads. But how can that omnipresent consciousness be the cause of this limitation of this universe? How can the infinite be the cause of the finite? How does it become the cause? How does the infinite become the cause of finite? For that, a very important aspect is missing, which is very emphatically being introduced in this 11th Upanishad. So I have used... Oh. So I have used these 3 words for what you can call the mother aspect. And that's why also when I was presenting this Upanishad in a nutshell, I said that one of the chapters emphasizes on father, mother, and son, this trinity. So this mother aspect, when it is being introduced for the first time in the Upanishads, not for the first time, but very clearly, very emphatically for the first time, in this Upanishad, there are 3 words that are being used for that. They refer, according to the Upanishad, they refer completely to the same thing, but they have slightly different meanings. And most of those words are well known. Māyā. Māyā is a very ancient word which has a negative as well as a positive connotation. In its negative connotation, it is the magic of the demons, for example, in the ancient stories by which they trick others. But in its positive connotation, it refers to wisdom, knowledge, understanding. So that's Indro Māyābhih Pururupa Iyate. It's already one can find the word being used already in the Rig Veda which is at least 1,500 years before Christ. In this, unfortunately, we don't have the whole text in front of us, but it's a mantra in here. Māyām tu prakṛtiṃ vidyāt. Māyā, prakṛti, both words, they occur together in this text. It's an extremely ancient text. This word. The second word is prakṛti. Prakṛti means the cause, but it's the feminine word of the cause. Vikriti is effect and prakṛti is cause. So it's the feminine form of cause. And this word occurs for the first time in this Upanishad. But since this Upanishad was composed in its present form in 300 BC, and this word was most likely used for the first time by sage Kapila as part of his Sankhya philosophy, the origins of which are believed to be in the 900 BC, 900 years before Christ. So that word has also been used, and the latest of these three words is Shakti. Shakti means potential, energy. All these three words, they are simply three different words for the same divine mother aspect. But sometimes the way they are used in philosophical discussions, usually in the context of Brahman, the word māyā is used. In the context of Purusha, the indwelling consciousness, prakṛti is used. And in the context of Shiva, the auspicious, and we have discussed all these words already in great detail, Shakti is used. And that's why in Kashmir Shaivism, etc., in the Shaiva traditions, the word Shakti has been very prominently used in teachings that are influenced by sage Kapila's teachings, such as Patanjali's Yoga Sutra. It's Prakriti and Purusha, and in the Upanishads, in Vedanta, it's Māyā and Brahman. But they are always the same. And they are somehow not considered, even though Māyā, Brahman, Prakriti, Purusha, Shakti, Shiva, they seem to be two different words, the masculine and the feminine aspect. And we tend to create distinctions because in our worldly understanding, a male is different from a female. But if you would really go a little bit deeper, dig deeper, then I think all of us have feminine as well as masculine qualities. We arise out of the two, our mother and father, and we have both of them within ourselves. What is just simply more prominent there, that is what we see. But if we would go deeper, and my father often says that he always used to say that if you are a boy, then you need to explore the feminine within you to be complete. And the same he used to say that if you are a girl, a woman, then you need to explore also the masculine within yourself to be complete. And that is when also both of them start understanding each other. When the man starts understanding the female within himself, then he can understand the woman also better, and vice versa. So the same thing, even though they are two different words, ultimately what the masters say is that there is no difference, no duality. They don't make up two entities. In the same way, like if you have a seed in front of you and the potential in that seed, every seed has a potential to become the tree. That doesn't make it two things. That potential, that energy is inseparably present within that seed. It cannot be. You cannot remove the energy out of it. It's inseparably, it permeates the seed inseparably. So we are just referring a very specific aspect of that seed. That's all. But there is no difference. So māyā, Brahman, two different words, but ultimately they are one and the same. Prakriti and Purusha, two different words, but ultimately they have to be perceived, at least in Advaita Vedanta, they are perceived as one thing, even though in Sankhya it's not the case. And similarly, Shakti and Shiva, that's why even in modern iconography, there is this beautiful image of Ardhanarishvara, and there are beautiful dances composed on this figure of the divine, in which half is female and half is male. So both of them they complete. And all the deities who have consorts, a feminine aspect, they are simply have to be understood as later representations of these fundamental principles. I think even Buddhism, particularly Vajrayana Buddhism, for example, Samantabhadra and Samantabhadri, these two. And like this, the images are there. The beautiful thing is that always the name of the feminine comes first and the name of the masculine has to come. Sita, Ram, Radha, Krishna. Always the name of the feminine comes first. So, my point simply was to show that it is quite possible, this question can also be interpreted differently, that is Brahman the cause? So instead of what is Brahman the cause, it can also be interpreted like this. Is Brahman, you have been talking in all these 10 Upanishads about Brahman. How is it really the cause? You never made it clear. And it is then in this Upanishad, in the 11th one, that this feminine aspect, so-called feminine aspect, is introduced here. And as I keep on pointing out that the Bhagavad Gita seems to be quite influenced by Śvetāśvatara's teachings, in the Bhagavad Gita, these words occur freely, even though they don't occur in the earlier Upanishads. So this was a discussion on the first question about the cause. Now comes the second question. The second question, anybody remembers what the second question is about? All right. Okay. So me writing it down is useful. All the effort that I make has a result. Thank you. That's great. So I'm pulling it a little bit closer to myself. Okay. So the second question is kutasma jātā, from where are we born? So it's really now the question is about birth, we as individuals. The earlier one was a very general question about the cause of everything, but now, because for these masters, the inquiry always starts from here, from the now and the here. Whenever they start exploring the universal principle, they start exploring it by looking in themselves. And that is how they find the answers. You will see in the second verse, so many possibilities come out. They are having discussions and so many possibilities are coming out. And none of them is sure which one could really be the cause. And they are chintya, they are having a dialogue, they are thinking about it, but they cannot reach a conclusion. Each one of them, each one of those possibilities seems to have its limitation. And then what we see is, in the third verse, which is in front of you, what we see, that then they enter in meditation in themselves. That is when the answer comes from within. So always the emphasis of the Upanishads is, if there is a question which needs an answer, if there is a doubt which needs a confirmation, the masters, not all the masters, we today we have all these great masters, but these great masters didn't have all these great masters. So who did they ask? They were bold enough to enter themselves and look for the answer of their questions in themselves. And that's why this kutaḥ, from where are we born? From where are we? This sanghata, accumulation of the five elements, and then some so strange energies in the form of the five senses of perception which can perceive the world out there, and then even more queer, stranger is this mind, the intellect, the ego, the sense of limitation, and the memory. My God, what great mysteries these are. But from where do they arise? So that's the question here. And then, what was the third one? That was about sustenance, the sustainer. The sustainer, that's the third question. By what do we live? Jīvāma kena. By what do we live? So the previous question was about our birth, and this next question is about by what do we exist? By what do we exist? By what do we live? I'll come back to these three questions about, but at the moment, what I'm reminded of is there is a very beautiful statement in one of the previous Upanishads that who says we live through this prana, the entering breath, and through apana, the breath that leaves us, but we live by that which pulls in this breath and expels it out, that life force. So this mantra is used particularly after someone has been practicing pranayama for a very long period of time and really starts identifying themselves with prana, with this breathing in and breathing out, by being completely focused on it, because the masters say very clearly that pranayama becomes yoga, a limb of yoga only when you unite your awareness to the breath. Then the result is, what happens is that as the breath calms down and then ultimately becomes very, very peaceful, so peaceful that the breathing is even no more noticed. If you look from outside, it feels as if the breathing has stopped. The practices that the yogic masters speak of is by holding cotton fiber in front of your nose. So right now, they have measured the distance. I don't remember the distance now. They have measured the distance up to where generally the fiber can be seen moving as the result of our breath. And it is this distance which, through the practice of pranayama, is reduced. So that even when it comes very close, the breath is so peaceful, so calm, that the fiber, even if held in front of the nose, does not show any sign of movement. So forget about holding your hands in front of the nose of such a yogin practicing pranayama, even if you would be holding a fiber in front of their nose, the fiber will not move. And yet, breathing is happening. But it's very, very subtle, extremely subtle, extremely subtle. And with that, also, the mind becomes equally peaceful. That is the purpose of the practice of pranayama. But as a result of that, the pitfall is that a person starts deeply identifying themselves. We always tend to identify with our objects. Our mind, our intellect, our ego, our thoughts, our memories, they are just objects, our objects. And yet we so deeply identify with them that we start defining ourselves through them. So a point comes where such a practitioner of pranayama has to be reminded by the yogic masters that you are not this breathing in and breathing out. You have started identifying yourself, but break that identification as well and search for that which is breathing in and which is breathing out. Search for that. It is that in which they are rooted. That is how the masters express it. So that is what we live by. Just to give an answer to this question. He will explain it themselves. And then the next question is about the absorber. Into which everything gets absorbed. Kvacha saṁpratiṣṭhāḥ. And into what do we merge? To what do we merge? These last three questions about the origin, about that by which it is being sustained, and into which it is being merged. This has a very special significance for the Upanishadic masters, which is not clearly visible by looking at this. But epistemological, we can call it, I think, an epistemological significance lies underneath there. Most of you must have heard the word ātman. What does it mean to you? When you hear the word ātman, what do you understand by it? What is its meaning? What does ātman mean? Self. Isn't it? That's what all the discussions also between Hinduism and Buddhism is about, that the Upanishads are about ātman, while the Buddhist teachings are about selflessness, anatta. So that is one of the meanings of the word ātman. Today, I'm going to talk about a very different meaning of this word. A very, very different meaning. What you said, ātman means the self, is a very general, popular meaning of the word ātman, and it is indeed used in Sanskrit language in that sense. But the masters also use it in a different meaning. Anything from which something arises, that which is the very essence of that thing when it exists, and into which it merges. Whatever that is, that can be referred to in the Upanishadic terminology as ātman. And so now I ask you another question, that if you have many pots made out of clay, what would be the ātman of all those clay pots? Clay. If you have many golden jewelries in front of you, the ātman of all those golden jewelry, of all that golden jewelry, will be gold. And indeed, the word ātman, gold is the ātman of all the golden jewelry clay is the ātman of all the clay pots. This is how very often in the discussions the word ātman has been used. Why? Because that jewelry arises out of that lump of gold, even when it exists in its distinct form into which it has been beaten into by the goldsmith, even when it's in that form which is so different from the golden biscuit or the lump of gold or whatever it was. It's a very distinct form. And yet, what is its essence? Even in that moment, if you take away the gold, nothing remains. And into what does it merge? Usually what is done is that all these jewelries, they are melted and they again become a lump of gold. So one can say that this gold is the very ātman of the jewelry. What it refers to basically is to that within the jewelry which doesn't change, which remains there before the jewelry came into existence, is there while the jewelry exists, and remains there even when the jewelry ceases to exist. That essence is referred to by the word ātman. And that's why, for example, if you attach some precious stones to that jewelry, they will not be part of that ātman, because they come and go. They are not the very essence. Or the name that you give, ring, necklace, they depend on particular shapes. So also they change, and the form that you attach to gold, that form too changes. But what doesn't change, whatever doesn't change, whatever that is what the masters refer to as ātman, the true self of that, the true nature of the self. And often such discussions can be found in the Upanishads. So, sorry? Is the? Yeah, swabhava. Yes. The very swabhava, the very true nature, if that's why I say true nature. Sometimes also the word yathatmya is used as it is in its own true nature. But swabhava, yes. Swabhava. So, these three questions, why they are interested in these three questions is because they are interested in finding the very ātman, the very essence. Now, you can easily relate. What is it which is present before all of us and our distinct shapes come into existence? What is that which is present even when we exist at the depth of our being? And what is that which remains even when we cease to exist in this present shape in which we exist? None of us can deny this principle. There was a time when we came into existence, and there will be a moment when our individuality will cease to exist. What is that? This is the question that these three questions are about. Whether it is something positive that can be expressed positively, which means that one can give some virtues and qualities of it and thus express it positively, or whether it can be expressed negatively, that's a different discussion. Different masters have expressed it differently. Now the last question is about the presider. The presider, this question is about, it is very strange that there must be some power presided over by which means that created beings are not completely free. What this question really assumes, that if we would be completely free, then we would always choose happiness for ourselves. But since there is suffering, what is it which leads us into suffering? What is it? What is that which leads us also, which forces us also into suffering? So this next question is about that. We'll come back to this question, but today the time is over. So if any questions are there, please. Yes. Yes.
The 11th Upanishad is much later in time than the first 10. Is this why it's linguistically different?
It's not today, at least according to this. How should I say this? This structure, the way in medieval times, in the 8th century, 9th century, the Upanishads were structured. They were not chronologically, according to the time, they were not structured, because we come to know the time only today with modern scholarship, linguistic scholarship. So the 11th Upanishad, according to today's modern historians, is not necessarily chronologically after all the 10 Upanishads. Some of the Upanishads, such as Kathopanishad, Prashna Upanishad, they might belong to the same time period, such as Śvetāśvatara Upanishad. So,
if it's not time, then why do you think this one somehow developed?
because this is how it was classically, the Upanishads, they were studied. This was how traditionally the Upanishads were studied, commented upon. First of all, it was the 10 principal Upanishads, which were considered the very core, and then came the other Upanishads. And I think the reason this Upanishad was not included in the 10 principal Upanishads is precisely because it starts speaking about a personal deity, Shiva, which then makes it a little bit limited to a particular tradition. It loses its universality. The Upanishads are supposed to be universal, acceptable to all, not to someone who has dedicated to a particular name and form. So this limitation is there in this Upanishad, because the moment you start speaking about a personal deity, you give it a name, you give it a form, then something changes. Unless the person completely remains aware that this is just a symbol. The earlier 10 Upanishads, as I said, even when they speak of Shiva, they don't speak of it as a personal deity, but simply as a state of awareness. That's all. They just use the word as we discussed this. So the first 10 Upanishads retain that universal acceptance. And remember, this structure was made at a time when most likely these different Hindu traditions had already come into existence, and they really wanted to have a core teaching which is fully acceptable to all the different traditions due to its universal nature. Why is Bhagavad Gita so widely accepted? Because it follows the same spirit of the Upanishads, and that's why even the Shaiva masters have commented on the Bhagavad Gita. Can you believe? In general, I'm speaking, Balinese Hindus are not so favorable towards Lord Krishna because they are strong Shaivas. So they don't, not that they dislike, but they are not favorable, let me say. They are not favorable to that form. And that's why there was tremendous clash between Krishna devotees and between Balinese Hindus, to such an extent that the organizations of Krishna devotees were even banned in Bali for some time. Bali, Indonesia, I'm speaking about. So, and yet, when it comes to the Bhagavad Gita, it's central. to them. They study the Bhagavad Gita because Bhagavad Gita again retains that universalness, and the 10 Upanishads retain that universalness. But the moment you start you start referring to a personal deity, then you start creating distinctions. And that's why great masters like Shankaracharya and in all the classical period, the commentators have most of the times only commented on the 10 principal Upanishads, not on Śvetāśvatara Upanishad. Śvetāśvatara commentaries come only in the 12th, 13th and 14th century, not before that. Even though they quote Śvetāśvatara Upanishad, but they don't comment on it. So it's not part of the core. But again, when you come to Ashtanga Yoga, when you come to the 8-limbed practice of yoga, when you start practicing dharana, retention of your awareness, you need a form, you need a name. And so this Upanishad is just making use of that name and form. So ultimately, from that perspective, it's not problematic. And the approach is very, very universal. But still, this is my personal interpretation. What sets it apart? Even though it is equally ancient, like some, of course, are far more ancient than this one, but still, some of the same time period have been included, while this not. So that's the only explanation I have. What was the second question?
The second question was, I think you wrote this order māyā, prakṛti, and
Shakti.
So is that the order that appears in this Upanishad?
It's there I took a little bit historical chronological order, that māyā and prakṛti we find in the most ancient sections. The Upanishads are considered the Purusha Prakriti is found in Kapila's teachings, which comes a little bit later. And then Shiva and Shakti is the prominent one in the Shaiva traditions, such as Kashmir Shaivism, which are then later. So there in fact, Shakti is the first one that is mentioned here, then māyā is the second one that is mentioned, and Prakriti is the third one that is mentioned. No. It just, I think, randomly that there is no reason. Not, I would have to think about it, but right now, no such. For example, in the third verse, he speaks of Shakti in the context of meditation, and so he's talking about the energy which is veiled by its own qualities within oneself. So, but you could equally use Prakriti, you could equally use. Descriptors, and sometimes also they have been explained. Yes.
Before Shankaracharya, māyā, do they have any explanation? Māyā is ignorance.
Yeah, I see from where the question is coming, and I think the core ideas of Shankaracharya's idea of māyā really come from Nagarjuna, from the Madhyamika tradition. And that those ideas of māyā, whether they are in Shankaracharya's tradition or in any other Hindu tradition, because they come, whoever speaks of māyā, because this has been always a big question for me, that when the earlier Upanishads don't mention māyā, or just mention māyā once in the sense of knowledge and wisdom, the knowledge to create this universe, when consciousness created this universe, then the knowledge by which it created it, that knowledge. And then from where comes this second meaning, which is also so central to the veil of ignorance. Veil of ignorance. From where does it come? Then the connection seems to be really the Madhyamika Karika. I cannot think of any other connection. So there, Advaita Vedanta, as by most of its examples that revolve around Maya and Gandharva Nagara, etc., which are widely used by Mahayana Buddhist masters. And then later on, these concepts even what we can see, what have seeped into the Vaishnava traditions, all the different traditions. But the origin is clearly, very clearly, I think, Nagarjuna. Nagarjuna's.
Bhagavad-gītā, there is meaning the Maya as a power.
Yeah, but not as avidya, not as ignorance. Yes, this idea that Maya as also then, of course, again, even in the most ancient teachings, as I said, that you can see the word Maya being used in a negative and a positive sense. So already there, the negative and positive side exists, but the negative side has been very strongly, I think, philosophically developed for the first time and expressed for the first time based on the texts that are available to us. It's Nagarjuna.
And remember, one time you posted in the Facebook, Bhagavad-gītā, there's two meaning of, two kind of Maya.
Yeah.
So, two kind of Maya. One is the upper and then lower.
Yes.
So that means there's not any kind of wisdom, not any kind of ignorance, it's just a kind of shakti.
Yes. Yes. Ultimately, what happens is that the same Shakti also to sustain this universe. Otherwise, everybody will become the Buddha. Everybody will become enlightened. So then also this veil of forgetfulness, which means to forget ourselves, to forget our true nature, that veil is also required. Without that, there will be no creation. There will be no creation. Like there will be no dream world without the veil of sleep. You have to fall asleep. You have to forget yourself, to dream and to dream properly, to fully be engrossed in that dream. If you are lucidly dreaming, it doesn't work. You have to forget yourself completely. Only then the true joy of being in this world, or the true joys and suffering of this world, imbibe us. So that can come only with that aspect, the second aspect of Maya. So she does both. Okay. She makes us forget ourselves also for this world to exist. Okay. सर्वे भवन्तु सुखिनः सर्वे सन्तु निरामयाः सर्वे भद्राणि पश्यन्तु मा कश्चित् दुःखभाग् भवेत् ॐ शान्तिः शान्तिः शान्तिः. My humble salutations to you. Namaste.